everybody. Welcome back inside the NFL Combine in the Indiana Convention Center here at Radio Row. Matthew Coller along with Arif Hasan from the Wide Left newsletter, although we don't really know what he does.
Yeah.
Is he a Vikings writer? Kind of.
Who's to say?
Is he a national NFL writer? Kind of. Does he do exposés on failed companies? Sometimes. But for now, you're gonna be a front office analyst. How do you want to do that? Is that good with you?
Yeah, sure. Why not? I didn't know what I was going to do when I showed up here.
Okay, so the Jaguars front office. No, I'm just kidding.
I just talked to Solak. I don't.
They are kind of interesting, but not for this podcast. We're going to talk about the Minnesota Vikings front office, and something that I like to have conversations with you about over the years, Reef. We've probably done, 100 podcasts of some kind together over the years, is always the bigger picture of the Minnesota Vikings franchise, because we've watched it go through lots of iterations, from the, hey, they drafted Teddy, and that's cool, to, oh, my gosh, the thing happened to Teddy. Now what do they do? And I think maybe our first podcast ever together was talking about the Sam Bradford trade.
Oh, that might be. Oh, my gosh. Yeah, holy crap.
Right.
I hated that trade.
You were very much against it. I was more on the side of it because he had a multi-year deal, and I think we were assuming that Teddy
would survive it.
Right. And my thought was like, he'll play in 2017, and then he.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we've seen the full arc of the Minnesota Vikings, and now here we are, sort of standing on the ledge of the thing that we have always talked about, that was the pearly gates, the rookie quarterback contract. Is it real? Can it happen? the rookie, $5 million and not 15% of the cap. So here we are standing on the edge of that. Within days, that could actually come to fruition. Do you think that we get there? What's your feeling on how they are going to handle the quarterback situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Kevin O'Connell's made it really clear. Kwesi's made it pretty clear in as many words as they can make it clear. They're kind of allergic to being direct. But, in as many words as they can, they've basically just said, I'm really happy that Sam has found a way to make some money, right? And that's clearly just an indication that, he won't be here. Like, it wouldn't shock me if they offered him a deal. It also, if they did, I think it would be just an egregiously low number. And he'd be able to use that as leverage somewhere else to where he's actually going to go, which I don't know, that could be Las Vegas. There are rumors that now the Los Angeles Rams are interested, now that Matthew Stafford has kind of forced his way around. So, if Vegas trades, we saw that report, I think, last night, that Tom Brady contacted Matthew Stafford. So if the Raiders get Matthew Stafford, now the Rams could potentially get Sam Darnold. It's a whole deal. I don't know. I don't think the Vikings want to have the horses to compete in that race. And honestly, they kind of don't. So I don't think they're going to go after Darnold. And I think that's going to be a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I think if the world played out a little bit differently, it's something I think about all the time. Like, if Darnold goes to Detroit and wins that game and plays really well, I have no idea how they could move on from him at this point, even if they lost in the playoffs, because it would have been the divisional round. Even if he didn't play well, you would have been talking about a 15-win season and beating the Packers in Detroit in back-to-back weeks, and look at all the numbers he put up. In a lot of ways, and I actually mentioned this to now there's a rule on the show. If you talk to someone, you already have to learn about it. If you talk to someone in the league, you have to lean in and say, in the league. So,
for sure.
I was mentioning to someone in the league yesterday about how if the Vikings had lost to the Seattle Seahawks, it's very possible the Seahawks win the division and the Vikings go to Tampa Bay and play a pretty mid-Bucks team and beat them. And Sam Darnold plays really well, and then they go to Philly with a chance to do something there, and then it snows, and then who knows? And then we're talking about Sam Darnold as the quarterback for next year. It feels like Darnold did them a favor by completely falling apart in those two games. That's how it feels at this moment, because of the rookie contract, what they can do in free agency, the potential of JJ McCarthy. Do you think that that's a safe feeling to have, though? And throw out your, all the damage done from the Vikings over the years with quarterbacks. But, is that the right feeling we should have of Sam Darnold with his sample size of actually playing in games, not imaginary games that we think JJ McCarthy will play,
Right.
that he did them this favor by playing so poorly and now very likely moving on.
I mean, I think they'd rather take the wins, but but no, I get what you're saying. Being able to kind of reveal all of the sides of Sam Darnold that you'd be buying into with a long-term deal, getting a preview of that beforehand, yeah, that's nice. I think, what was it, Kwesi said, like, you can't overweight the fact that he played poorly against the same two teams twice, but you can't, like, ignore it either. He said something along those, which I thought was a pretty harsh statement. And I think that it is in their minds that he doesn't always have all the tools in the bag for every situation. It might just be, that these kind of teams have something against him, or it might just be that the lights are too bright in certain situations. Whatever it is, now we know that there's this other element to Sam Darnold that you don't have to buy into when you're constructing a contract, whereas if before you don't have that exposure, now you're buying a contract where you don't know, like, all of the features of this product, right? You don't know, what the goods are. And so in that sense, yeah, like, I think that he did do them kind of a favor by kind of revealing that element that was always going to be available. But at the end of the day, I think they would have wanted the wins, and like, if they'd gotten all the way to the NFC Championship game and then offered a bad contract, I think they wouldn't kick themselves too badly.
We're also assuming that it would be a bad contract, and the hard thing about the NFL, which makes it both fascinating and wonderful and also impossible to figure out, is the small sample size element. Because if you go through the playoffs, let's take a look at how all the quarterbacks performed. Oh, a lot of them had the same exact thing happen to Sam Darnold, but Sam Darnold is the only one where we go, turned into the same old guy.
Yeah.
I saw a few Justin Herbert hot take artists trying to do that thing, and I get it because I've called him Kirkbert before, but even then, like, that's a guy who's a clear franchise quarterback, and C.J. Stroud is a clear franchise quarterback. I think Mahomes is going to stay with the Chiefs for a while, and
Seems
yet
like it.
The same exact thing happened to all of those guys. Even when Matthew Stafford had a chance to go tie up the game against the Eagles, what was it that happened? Oh, yeah, pressure took apart his biggest moments in that game, and I think more than ever we saw defensive lines dominate offensive lines and have enormous impacts. I mean, I even go back. History is so on the side of being forgiving to Sam Darnold. Like, if you look at how about the early Eli Manning playoff games where he's atrocious, and then he has two of the best runs ever. Joe Flacco, we think Joe Flacco's clutch as hell in the playoffs, right? Not in his early games. They were surviving Joe Flacco. They didn't even offer Joe Flacco a contract going into 2012.
Yeah, he was using a lame duck contract the year he won the Super Bowl, and so they were put into a situation where they had to offer him, which I don't think they minded, but like put into a situation where they had to offer like this enormous contract because they didn't think that he'd get it done.
That's how difficult this is to figure out, because
Yeah.
if you say, well, obviously Sam Darnold showed who he really is, it's like, I'm not sure that's obvious based on a lot of the history of other quarterbacks in the Super Bowl 2 times. The greatest QB of a generation has completely come apart at the seams when his offensive line couldn't block. So anyone is capable of having this happen, and I think that that's what we would be saying a lot if JJ McCarthy did not exist. And you go back, though, and look at this Darnold season, you go, man, there's a lot of good there. There's a lot of good numbers there and everything else. So the bet that they're making is this sort of mathematical formula on J.J. McCarthy plus
the
X
cap space.
Yes,
Yeah.
X number of dollars is worth taking a risk of not knowing what we actually have in J.J. McCarthy. And then they're taking a sample size of he's been in our building, he's been in our training camp practices, which we've talked about a lot, were really, really good. But that is still not a lot of information to work with, and that's why this whole decision, until I got here and until I talked to people
In the league.
and honestly at the podium too, those guys, you can go and watch them at Vikings.com if you want to see what they said. But the fact that they were not talking about giving McCarthy patience, not talking about Darnold in any way that would insinuate that he's coming back, and like, thanks for the memories, was kind of my takeaway from a lot of the stuff they said. So now I feel like pretty confident in what's going to happen here. But I also think about when you have certainty of, like, this guy is capable of winning 14 games and having a top 10 PFF grade and having a top 10 QB rating and top 10 in touchdowns. And he played with a backup left guard, a terrible left guard, a terrible center situation for pass blocking, no running game really to speak of, half of his tight end for the season when he's not even 100%. And then you're like, oh, McCarthy will be better. It's like a little weird to me to just make that jump and assumption. I think we're giving a lot of credit to two people on this, and you can tell me how right it is to give the credit to those two people. One wears number 18, and the other is the coach of the year. Folks, I'm trying a new thing in order to stop ordering from fast food restaurants all the time with my busy schedule. It's called Tempo Meals. Tempo is a weekly delivery service that delivers chef-crafted meals from a dietitian-approved menu right to your door. Their perfectly portioned lunches and dinners take the guesswork out of eating as well. They're fully prepared, and they can be heated in the microwave in just 3 minutes. I got my first box, and wow. Talk about easy and delicious. I got sweet and tangy chicken, mozzarella marinara chicken, and barbecue chicken. Kind of a trend there, but there's so many more options than that. All of them tasted great for me, were super quick and easy to make. They were my choices out of dozens and dozens that took about 5 clicks to get set up with Tempo Meals. For a limited time, Tempo is offering my listeners 60% off your first box. Just go to tempomeals.com/purpleinsider. That is tempomeals.com/purpleinsider for 60% off your first box. Rules and restrictions apply.
Yeah, no, and I think that's it. And I think, when people have asked me, like, what should the Vikings do, obviously you give your take, but at the end, it's difficult not to give Kevin O'Connell a lot of leeway on quarterback decisions, right? Like, whatever decision he ends up making, I'm just going to say there's probably a really good reason behind it and that he's got a lot of this under control. No one's going to bat 1,000. No one's perfect. And maybe he got lucky, with the way he's handled, the quarterback situation so far. I kind of doubt it. I think he's good. But, there's always a possibility, right? And so I think that you trust him implicitly when it comes to your evaluation of what is possible with JJ McCarthy, right? Which I think is reasonable. But that's also the only kind of information we have to go off of. We have leaks from inside the building. Sorry, inside the building? I'm not.
You can do it.
Okay, inside the building. About how much they love this guy. They rave about this guy, right? They won't stop talking about how much, even partway through, during the rehab, they're talking about how much they love, his dedication, his work ethic, how quickly he's picked up the offense and stuff like that. And, they're excited about this guy. And, we've been through a lot of situations where teams have been excited about a guy that turns out to be doo-doo, right? And, you develop a healthy cynicism about that kind of, talk. But when it's coming from somebody who's had a lot of success developing quarterbacks, yeah. And then the second thing is, obviously, Justin Jefferson. He's going to make a lot of people look good. Not only is he the most double-teamed receiver in the league, he's also the best receiver in the league against double teams. That's insane, right? And so you can, if there's a guy that you can throw to who doesn't have to be open, and that's a good decision, I'm not going to say it's hard to be a bad quarterback. It's actually really easy. But if you've got a baseline or a floor of talent, it is a lot easier to kind of figure out answers to problems when you've got 18. So, yeah, I think that's fair.
And there is something that is very strong in terms of a data set that we can't see about inside the building, around him every day. That's what you hear about all the time. Well, they're around him every day. That matters. I mean, they see his work ethic. They see what he understands. So Kevin O'Connell went into great detail. And this was another one of those strong hints that it's JJ McCarthy, which was he went into great detail about all the things McCarthy would do last year. And O'Connell said something to the effect of, this isn't an exact quote, but something to the effect of, we treated him as if he was starting the game in his preparation. So to bring that up today seems pretty important, doesn't it?
Seems relevant.
And he's like, yeah, it was great. He's ready to start games or something. It's kind of oh. I think it was actually Kwesi who said, mentally he knows our language and he's ready to go play free when he gets out there. And you're like, is he getting out there? Is that today? Or what's happening? You guys aren't protecting this information as well as maybe you wanted to. But when it just in general, when it comes to being around someone and seeing the progress, what I was most impressed by last year with McCarthy was in rookie camp and OTAs and minicamp, it was rough. It was okay, this, and he said that. That's just not even me. That was our last conversation with him before the break. He came over and he said, yeah, there's been some hard days here, and I got to go back and be pretty hard on myself and everything else. He came back for training camp so well prepared, and when he had bad days in training camp, the next day was great. And when he threw an interception in the preseason game, the next drive was great, and it was just like, this guy has the thing that they say that he had. And that's, to me, all the draft stuff, they always know what you might have.
Right.
They can identify that the certain skill sets could be there in the NFL if it works out. Almost, in fact, if you go back and look at any star player and their scouting report, you're like, that's exactly who they are. There's never a star player scouting report where they're like, no, that was way off. He doesn't do that at all. Like, that's other than maybe Jefferson being a slot guy. But, like, aside from that, so all the character and stuff, all that work ethic, all that stuff that sounds cliche and could be anybody, but it's all so real.
Right.
Leadership for that position. And what I was impressed by last year was his physical skill set, because he's growing and developing. So I think, to me, the big holdup was I need to know how he's doing physically before I can say that I'm like 90% sure that he's going to be the starter. And they went out of their way multiple times to say, guys, he's good. Physically, we're good to go. So there's that. But I think it is actually a data set of
right.
what the coach has had in terms of conversations and how they've seen him work and how they've seen him lead. So if Kevin O'Connell believes in all that, because that's hours and hours and hours of those two together, then I buy it completely that he should be the guy and they're good to go, and that I think there's a good chance that he can thrive in this environment if KOC, with all those more hours than I have, buys into that.
Yeah, no, I think that's real information to work off of. It's something where, like, if I'm asked to make a bet, I'm not pushing all my chips or anything like that, because there's always a degree of uncertainty. But I think that it's easy to discount that kind of information because we don't have access to it. Like, we always prefer the information that is more available to us, and we tend to weight it more, and sometimes that can lead us into mistakes, right? And I think that, it's important to consider all of that as we go in, especially, like, as Kevin O'Connell was talking about McCarthy's offseason heading into training camp. He was talking about how, with McCarthy, we wanted to kind of bring him into the offense. I don't think he used the word ease him in, but I think, like, bring him into the offense, not like hit him with a fire hose immediately. And it turns out that was the wrong approach. He needed it, and he adapted to it, and he thrived to it, and he learned the offense way faster than we expected. And we already thought the world of him when we drafted him, right? That kind of like thing that we don't have access to. His knowledge of the playbook, his command is probably an even better way to put it. His command of the playbook and, like, what's being, what they're trying to accomplish with each play, and having, like, an intuitive sense for the way this play should feel out. Like, that's stuff that we're not going to have that much information about. We can evaluate the individual throws at training camp. There's a huge limitation to that. There's the obvious limitations, but there's also, like, the less obvious limitations of, hey, the defense said that they weren't going to blitz in the practice sessions, and then that's all they did. That kind of stuff, right? Where we don't have, like, there's just so many complicating factors. And so it is important that information be treated with some level of seriousness. It's also important to understand that information comes from people who have an obvious bias for it to be the case. Because, like, when you read, and, like, the McCarthy profiles are outstanding. Like, there's a bunch out there. Shout out to my former workplace, The Athletic. They've got some incredible ones. But, like,
we don't give Alec Lewis any, so hopefully you mean someone else.
Yeah, obviously, of course. Okay. Yeah.
Purple Insider wrote one. So.
But yeah, I mean, shout out Purple Insider. I hear that they write some good stuff. I mean, I don't read, so I don't.
That's purpleinsider.football. Sign up for the newsletter. You can get my written work. Go on.
Yeah, there you go. But, like, the profiles are genuinely interesting and outstanding, and they speak to this character. But I've also read a lot of profiles of players that were outstanding, exciting, speak to their work ethic and character, and those players did not work out, right? So there's always, like, some veneer of cynicism I'm applying to a lot of this stuff, but it is just difficult not to buy in to the way that this organization, who has a proven track record of figuring out what to do at quarterback, the way this organization has been thinking about, talking about, and treating JJ McCarthy. And so I think that there's probably something there. Is it a 14-win upgrade, or is it like another 14-win quarterback? I don't know, but maybe with those additional cap dollars that you save, it could be there. Who's to say?
Well, that's the whole point of what they're trying to create, a bumper there for that, is even if he's not as good as Sam Darnold right away, that he's got guards. Bump back into the middle to
Right.
knock over the pins. Oh, their running game is actually not ranked 28th in EPA, which if someone really wants Sam Darnold to be the quarterback, whoever that person is, I don't know based on conversations with fans all offseason, but let's say one guy wants Sam Darnold back. I think he might say, right, but Darnold didn't have guards and didn't have a running game, and even if you sign him to a 3-year contract, the first-year cap hit is $7 million, and you get those players for him, can't he recreate or better what he did last year? And that is something I think about too, because there is, if they didn't have McCarthy, we would be saying, all right, sign that 3-year deal, 120, get Trey Smith, get this Will Fry, get whatever other guards you could get, stack it up and just, bump all that money down the road for when Amazon buys the NFL and there is no cap or whatever. We'd be saying that because Darnold played well enough to justify, and without, I think with a clear number 1 and number 2 wide receiver, but to me, without one of the 5 or 6 best supporting casts in the league, once Christian Darrisaw got hurt, because now you're talking about 4 flawed offensive linemen and 1 good one, and you're talking about really 1 great wide receiver, half of the TJ Hawkinson we've seen in the past. Jordan Addison was the same player as last year. Naylor was not much of an impact player, and Jones didn't truly change what they had in the backfield the way that they wanted him to. So I think it wasn't the greatest situation. He still thrived that much. And so you kind of go back and forth between, there was an argument for bringing back Darnold if they didn't feel really good about McCarthy. What I'm very curious about, though, is stylistically how the two could be different.
Right.
Because Darnold was so much of it's kind of like, I think of them, this is from one training camp. Also, I wouldn't believe it so much had I not seen it in camp myself with the throwing and everything else. But I want to make a baseball comparison here of, Darnold swings for the fences. And that's what gets him killed sometimes, and that's what makes him great sometimes. Where I think McCarthy is a lot more discerning about where the football is supposed to go. And I feel like if you're Kevin O'Connell, you're like, I love that you took all those deep shots, and that's great, but also you tried to scramble backwards 43 times. Yeah. And I just and that's the whole hard thing. It's like, I love that you made that play against Seattle, but I hate that you took that sack 8 different times in key situations throughout the season, where I don't think McCarthy's going to take that many sacks. I think he's going to see the middle of the field better, and he's going to get to checkdowns faster and get through reads faster and see the field better. This is just from watching in training camp every day. But I don't think he's going to rock throws like Sam Darnold. I mean, Darnold did stuff I've never seen before with the football up close. And so I think there is this kind of it's going to be a little bit safer maybe and less variance.
Yeah.
And then I guess the ceiling's going to be figured out by, the rest of it, how much he can grow with the skill set that he has.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, it would be foolish essentially to think that the offense is going to look the same or that it's going to be as explosive. I think the Vikings led the league in explosive play rate last year. Impossible to imagine that that's going to happen again. And I think that what I think a lot of people forget is, it's hard to build an offensive line in one offseason. They have to potentially replace 3 interior offensive line positions, right? And then B, having the capacity to do that with maybe that additional cap space gives you more license to scheme up those explosives as opposed to have a guy run around for a little bit and generate an explosive. And you might find yourself in a situation where you can increase both the safety of the quarterback play and the explosiveness just from improving your play opportunities because of that change in the offensive line and stuff like that, and then TJ Hawkinson's healthy and all that, right? That is a possibility, but I think it's more likely that you've got maybe a higher floor from play to play and a lower ceiling from play to play, and you just kind of hope that median is shifting upward as the season progresses. And then maybe you can throw in additional opportunities to create explosives and things like that. You're always going to have Justin Jefferson available on some of these throws. You're always going to have Jordan Addison streaking deep on a lot of these throws. So I think that there are going to be explosives, but I think it's just going to be impossible for us to expect the same rate of deep balls, explosive plays, outstanding, oh my gosh, there's 8 players in the backfield, he spun out of it, now he's scrambling, and then he threw it 40 yards to a guy that's been running for 5 seconds. You're probably not going to get as much of that. As good of an athlete as McCarthy is, I think he's just more likely to take, quicker, safer throws when those opportunities, appear.
Right, and I don't want to make it sound like he doesn't have a good arm, because I was very impressed
Yes.
by his actual arm strength. Deep ball touch and accuracy were improving, but they're not where. I mean, Darnold's 27, has got one of the best arms in the league, so I just don't expect that. That whole dance to do for Kevin O'Connell, because he wants to hit big
He
pass.
loves it.
I mean, everybody loves it. I kind of want to see him like run the ball successfully sometimes and then hit the big pass, but understanding that like that's not going to go away, but it could be parsed out a little bit differently, I think, and to have him, it's like, because when you say it, you don't want to say like, oh, it limits their ceiling or it makes them safer. They could have a better offense overall.
Right, yeah.
What I've always thought of with when people rank quarterbacks, which makes me want to self-harm, I look at sorry, that's a bad joke. I shouldn't have said that, but makes me want to throw salt in my own eyes. How about that? Rather than read another quarterback ranking, but whatever. When I think about those rankings, one of the things that they always seem to miss is that it doesn't matter. Like the offense and how many points you score. It's like, well, I ranked Jalen Hurts, the 23rd quarterback in the league. Congratulations. They had one of the best offenses in the NFL overall with the way they played to his strengths. That's what really matters here. This isn't some sort of all-player draft where
right.
everybody, like, this isn't some sort of imagination land. It's real football teams. So with JJ McCarthy, if they possess the ball more, and I'm sure Brian Flores would like that. And if they have higher success rates on their plays, but lower explosive, well, you could still score a heck of a lot of points in doing it that way if they play off the run a little better and, all sorts of things. What do you think he needs? Like, this is so funny because we've not seen him play any football. And again, we have an imagination land based on just, very small sample. But they're going to go into free agency here, potentially, if they moved Arnold, with a hell of a lot of money. We know he needs guards. What do you like? What kind? How much? How do you do it? How do you get there? Isn't that funny with this offseason now? If we have this clarified, it's not what, it's how. Like everything is, how do you move Darnold? Who do you move him to? How do you get these guards? We know what they want to do, but how do you get there?
Yeah. I think, the biggest problem is that the Vikings have a lot of areas to fill, right? Because it's not just an offense, right? Mm-hmm. They have to worry about the three cornerbacks. I mean, it sounds like the Byron Murphy deal may get done. I don't know. But, they still have to figure out cornerback. They can't just hope that Blackman is going to fill in its slot, and that's good. You need another cornerback. You need to figure out the safety situation, whether or not you're going to see a retirement, whether or not you can bring back Cam Bynum, all of that. And then on top of that, you maybe want to make some improvements at defensive tackle. Like you're missing players at some positions, and then there's some positions where maybe you want to make an upgrade. And then you have to figure out, what's the guard situation. And then I think on top of that, I think they want to reevaluate what the run game looks like. In addition to making sure that they've got the horses to, carry a run game, I don't know that they've been moving in the correct direction as the run game has moved away from zone-style work to more gap-style, duo-style work, inside zone type stuff. They were a really successful outside zone team really successful, maybe that's not. But, there was a lot of opportunity when they were doing outside zone stuff, and I don't know that they need to move away from that, especially because it's not as if McCarthy doesn't have experience running play action off of those types of plays. So I think it's building a little bit more cohesive of a run game. It's a very cohesive offense in terms of the way the passing game works. I think one of the things that I would have wanted in an offense for someone like McCarthy is a lot of options available to him at all three levels and all 9 quadrants of the field or whatever. I think that giving him opportunities to throw in all those areas, that's good, but their Vikings are going to have that, so I'm not worried about that. I think it's making sure that run game works and then making sure that the offense doesn't have to save the game all the time, right? If you've got, a well-built defense that has the ability to allow the offense to just run the ball for 4-minute drills a bunch of times, I think you're in a good spot. So I think it's on top of making sure that you've got a cohesive run game, on top of making sure that you add the right personnel, I think they need to be really smart about their defensive acquisitions because that's going to drive a lot of what's going to be placed on McCarthy's shoulders. He can't live in the 2-minute drill the whole time where he's always in shotgun, always effectively in third down. Opposing pass rushers can pin their ears back. They know it's going to be a pass. They've got like their NASCAR package, or whatever you want to call it, out in the field. They've got 4 edge rushers. Like no matter how many guards you get, that's going to be a bad situation. So you want to create good situations for him where he's not always playing hero ball or being forced to play hero ball, on top of making sure that the offensive cast is good around him.
The outside pitches and stuff were good for Aaron Jones. The thing that was lacking, it was like in the middle of the field, if it's 1st and 10, you could get 5 yards from Aaron Jones. It was everything else. It was a lack of explosiveness from the running game. They had, I've been using this stat for everybody. Everyone loves it. They go, wow, okay, interesting. So you got to act excited. They, in the last 3 years, have the fewest explosive run plays in the league of all 32 teams.
That's terrifying. There's some bad teams out there. That's awful.
The fewest. I mean,
that's interesting. Wow.
Yeah, there you go. I think it was, but you did have a real reaction there. It was 20-plus, I think. The fewest 20-plus yard runs over the last 3 years, and that was what was lost with Aaron Jones in the second half of the season as he wore down. They you couldn't get freebies. I feel like imagine if you're Jalen Hurts and you're like, all right, we got this big game plan here going out, and it's 1st down, and they got 75 yards to go, and I hand it off to touchdown. I did nothing. And I just they have not had that. Remember Kirk in 2019? I mean, how many times did he throw a screen to Dalvin Cook and was like, oh, there's 30 yards?
Yeah.
I did nothing. That was wonderful. And they just haven't had that. And I think with JJ McCarthy as an inexperienced quarterback, I mean, we've talked about it with other quarterbacks. Hey, it can help him get in second and short, run play action, that kind of thing. But what about if you never have to pass on some drives? What about if you just get a 40-yard run and that's where you need a different running back, you need different linemen, you need should have don't be inappropriate. Say something not inappropriate. I was going to say they should have like an upside down flag of Gary Kubiak, like signaling like a warning for the running game, but that's just not right. And I said it anyway.
There you go.
What's better? There's like red lights, flashing, sirens. Like, this is a panic situation. Your run game was so bad over these last 3 years. And we kept hearing in the offseason, like, yeah, we need to improve that. We need to improve that. And I'm kind of to the point where I'm like, now's fine. Like, right bleeping now. Or I don't think you're going to get out of this offense what you think. It's going to have a limitation. When you go up against the Rams and they send 4 guys upfield, you got to have an answer. And they just didn't. And, okay, now you can make the excuses for that. Well, we missed on Ty Chandler. Well, we missed on Ed Ingram. Well, we yada, 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 yada. It's like, okay, well, now you got all the cap space. That was your whole thing.
Yeah.
So now go make this happen.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really struck me this year is, just seeing fan feedback on Twitter, which is, of course, the best way to learn about the game, is when the Vikings would struggle in the red zone, it was always it was like one of two things. It was, man, I can't believe they didn't run the ball. They should run the ball more. Or if it was a different game, I can't believe they're running the ball so much that never works for them in the red zone, which is like, yeah, of course, they can't win, but that's their own fault, right? Like, if they can't run the ball in the red zone, that's going to create a lot of big problems for them. And I was thinking about, when you mentioned Dalvin Cook, I was thinking about the fact that there were a lot of red zone possessions that didn't happen for the Vikings because there's a 25-yard run right outside the red zone, right? And that would have been nice, right, to have to avoid red zone plays because you scored. And I think that, having a bunch of opportunities or options for how you're going to attack, the red zone, aside from, running a bunch of slants and hoping Jefferson gets open, that's going to be huge in terms of scoring, right? I mean, the Vikings were not a bad scoring team, but they could have been an outstanding scoring team if they had been just a little bit better in the red zone. And of course, yeah, they had injury at left tackle. They had to move around members of their offensive line. Yeah, of course. But you mentioned, this is a 3-year problem. Yeah, they made mistakes. Like you said, they've had an opportunity to fix these mistakes. They don't really have a lot of wiggle room when it comes to that anymore. They have to make sure that they fix that, sooner rather than later. But yeah, I think finding ways to just offload burdens from McCarthy is going to be the way that this offense is going to actually evolve and move into a place where instead of, winning Coach of the Year accolades, you get Super Bowls, right? That's the goal.
So there's a crazy thing. You bring up the Super Bowl. There's a crazy thing about the Super Bowl that usually the best football team or the best quarterback wins it. It's wild.
Yeah, it's nuts.
It's just insane. And that tends to happen through the history of all sports. You either have the best player or the best complete team. Knowing that and making it just realistic that JJ McCarthy will probably not be Patrick Mahomes.
Unlikely.
I know there's some people who think that he's already that good, but, we'll see him play a single game and not against Raiders backups first before we kind of decide that. So let's just assume that he isn't that just yet. That means you got to build the best team, which leads me to the question of, we know what the best team looks like and looked like last year in the Eagles, and that's one of the most complete rosters I feel like we've seen in the last 10 years. How far can they get? Not how far away. We know how far away. We just talked about it for 30 minutes. How far can they get in a single offseason with McCarthy in that cap space and the limited draft capital, but maybe more with Darnold, along that line toward being the most complete team in the NFC?
Yeah, I don't think they can do that exactly in one offseason. I think that 2 successful offseasons puts you in that category potentially. But you take a look at how the Eagles built, or in previous years when you've looked at best teams or whatever, how they've built, and they hit on a single offseason in a big way. The Eagles did. A lot of these other teams that have been successful have. The Eagles offseason was outstanding, especially the way that they handled that rookie draft. But, you take a look at some of their key players, and they're guys that have been on the team for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Milton Williams came up huge for them this season. He was a draft pick from 4 years ago. He's about to hit free agency, right? And so these complete teams are built from years of team building with probably 1 or 2 meteoric off seasons that have really boosted that. And if the Vikings have that kind of meteoric offseason, if they get 3 rookie starters out of this draft, which would be crazy because they barely have 3 picks, right. But if they get 3 rookie starters out of this draft and they nail a couple of their free agency swings and they shore up some things here or there, they're not going to be a complete team. There's just so much work to do to get there. But I think that they could get close enough where you could talk about them as a top 10 roster in the league. They already have a bunch of great pieces, like we talked about Jefferson and Hawkinson and Darisaw and Addison. That's all true, but you take a look at what's happening with that edge unit. That's a fantastic unit. Harrison Phillips is still playing really good ball. The way that they handle the linebacker situation is fascinating. I think Blake Cashman is an outstanding player, right? They've got a lot of really good players that come from what just happened to be a successful offseason. If they have a meteoric one, they're in the conversation for having one of the better teams in the league. But I think it's going to take a couple of off seasons from where they are now to potentially be the best complete team, or what is it, like player for player rosters in the league.
All right, before we wrap up, I want to throw one totally off the wall thing at you, not completely, he's still in the Vikings realm, but not related to any of this conversation that much. And then I want to know one thing that we haven't talked about that you're just very interested in the Vikings offseason. Okay, how do you feel about Dallas Turner? I don't think you and I have talked about Dallas Turner in any capacity. We went to Lynx finals games, but I don't recall us saying, hey, Alana Smith's drilling a 3. What do you think about Dallas Turner? Yeah. I don't think we talked about that quite. Where do you stand on that?
I mean, I'm not bothered or worried. It is frustrating to see someone like Jared Verse have the season that he had, but they have different responsibilities, so it's not exactly one for one. I think that there's a great opportunity for him to be a really important, designated pass rusher or third edge rusher or something like that. I don't think he's on a great path, but I don't think that that's dispositive. I think that people very easily react very quickly to some of these things, and I think that they kind of threw a lot at him. Obviously, everyone's going to say, hey, he's 2 all-pro edge rushers ahead of him or whatever. And, yeah, sure. But, also Patrick Jones, who played really well. I don't want to knock him or anything like that. But, you would hope that, a first-round pick, the way that they reacted in the draft for him to being able to trade up for him, you would think that you would have a bit more of an immediate impact, have the ability to get ahead of somebody like a Patrick Jones. And so I think that he is behind the curve of where you want him to be. But a lot of players have been behind the curve of where you want them to be and have turned out to be outstanding players, even first-round picks. So I'm not bothered, I just think that, pay attention to how that kind of develops and turns out.
I looked at this maybe a few years ago about edge rushers and how much we know about them after 1 year. Because there's some positions that if someone's bad after 1 year, you're like, yeah, they're in trouble. But there are a lot of positions where it's like, oh, by year 2, you better know. By year 3. And I think edge rusher is a year 2 position.
Yeah.
And when I say I looked at this, I think I mean PFF's Timo Risky did like a really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so shout out to him.
Offensive lineman, you got to wait like 3 years. Yeah.
I mean, I just came up with this brilliant thing I thought of that I clearly read online. So, no, but Timo does incredible work over there and the data science side. But he had it was very distinct, like when they start to hit their peaks. And I think edge rushers was year 2, but it definitely wasn't year 1. And we saw, Khalil Mack had like 4 sacks his first year and then becomes great. And I think part of it is the physical nature of it, where Dallas Turner was not this huge hulking dude who could just step right in and defeat tackles with his strength. So it's going to have to be something else. I also think that Brian Flores is a bit of a mad scientist here with Dallas Turner, and I think he sees him as being like Van Ginkel.
Yeah, he's dropping him back in coverage a ton. He's moving him around a ton, which is what I mean by, like, it's not a Jared Verse situation.
Right, and if he's Van Ginkel, look at what that can do. But even Van Ginkel, and I know he wasn't a first-round pick, but he didn't become that for a couple of years. Like, that takes longer, and I think Brian Flores, and Dane Mizutani made this point the other day, and I really liked it. Like, if you wanted to cook the books and put him in and blitz him every time on third down, you could have got him 5 or 6 sacks. What is that worth versus developing a true player for that position? So I think this year will be really telling about how far he can really come and what the value can be, but we should not make a lot of judgments after this year. What else you got? You got something random for me?
I didn't know I had to bring anything for you.
Well, you could direct it toward me. Just think of something.
Sure. Do you think the Vikings will continue to invest in fullbacks? It feels like they had more fullback snaps this year than we've had in a long time.
I like that. I like that question. Well, I like the concept, and maybe this is biased because I wrote a story on it, but I like the concept of a third down pass blocking fullback, because what you can't do with Josh Oliver or TJ Hawkinson is help on the inside. So it was very clever of Kevin O'Connell to say to C.J. Ham, you are essentially a chipper of guard. Like, you're helping the guard and the center positions by chipping those guys or stepping up. And look where all these teams blitz. And I heard a statistic somewhere from someone in the league that the Vikings were stunted more than any other team. Like stunts, twists, because they wanted their top rushers heading to the inside. So using C.J. Ham, he's getting those stunts and twists. He can help in there, those blitzes that they send on third downs. That is a very good talent to have, and he's good at it. And it was an impact play. On the running thing, he's never understood how to use a fullback in the slightest, and it didn't help last year, I don't think, when C.J. Ham was in there running. He should still have a position. He's a great special teamer. He's a great veteran player. He doesn't cost much money. And that pass block thing will be relevant because you don't want to get Aaron Jones hurt if he comes back. And if you've got Quinshon Judkins or Travion Henderson or someone's name that I'm 100% certain on how to pronounce it, those guys aren't going to know how to pass block for this year.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very clever usage of like an extra blocker in there for third downs. But as far as the fullback's role in this world, I'd love to see it come back. I'd love to see some neck rolls. I'd love to see that position. I just don't know that it's ever coming back in the running way, because you have to run play actions off it. I mean, when you watch old games, I watch old games, those wide receivers, they're standing out there like this.
It's crazy.
They're not moving. The corners aren't moving. The defense isn't moving. And then play happens. And that is just not football today.
Yeah.
There's so much movement, so much pre-snap movement. You need 4 or 5 options for the quarterback. You can't just run an I form. Can you believe, I watch Cordell Stewart games sometimes, and I'm like, I can't believe this.
There's so many bodies right there.
Steve McNair's running out of the I form with 2 wide receiver options on a play, and you're just like, how did he even do what he did? So I think that the advancements have made that kind of not that possible, because you need everybody to be a threat. But what is he? I mean, it's $2 million or something.
Mm-hmm. I mean, plus he's an outstanding special teamer, right? So.
Yeah, a real leader, captain, special teamer. Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, ending on that was after such a good conversation You know. Well, anyway, we've got a W season coming up again, and we'll be doing that. And
so many changes, dude. I don't know.
I know. Like, who's on whose team? We're going to have that feeling in a couple of weeks, and I'm sure you and I will get together throughout the offseason again very soon. Arif Hasan, the Wide Left newsletter. Since it was my idea to start it, I deserve all the credit. I have been given no money whatsoever, but this right here, I feel satisfied that we're even. So, no, it's really, really good. A lot of great writing on there, and I hope you check it out, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks for coming on, man.
That's good. Thanks for having me.
Football.